Hello, yeah, I should be uploading more. I know. Yeah, you should. This isn't a video about the messenger. Get out of here. Fine, I didn't want to be a part of this video anyway. So, anyway, Hollow Knight has a plethora of creatures known as higher beings. So I'm going to try to explain what they're all about and introduce some crazy speculation along the way. Well, first off, before we talk about higher beings, we need to know what a higher being is. Higher beings are said to be godlike creatures that exist above all others, and they have abilities that normal bugs don't have. The higher beings are usually worshipped as gods by the normal bugs. So essentially, they're the kids at the elementary school who have a phone. The current cast of higher beings includes the Pale King, the White Lady, the Radiance, the Nightmare Heart, the Shade Lord in the last ending, and then there are two unconfirmed higher beings. These creatures are just listed as powerful beings in the wiki. They might not be as powerful, but I'm still going to talk about them. These powerful beings are the Lifeblood creature and the gods of thunder and rain. Let's start with none other than Hallownest's leader, the Pale King. The Pale King first arrived in Hallownest in his worm form. When he first arrived in Hallownest, he arrived in the Kingdom's Edge. In the Kingdom's Edge, he shed his worm form and emerged from the broken egg inside the cast-off shell area. The reason he changed to a smaller form was so he could match the bugs of Hallownest, almost like being able to relate to them. He had the ability to expand the minds of the bugs in Hallownest. He wanted to be worshipped by the bugs of Hallownest, so he promised that the kingdom would last eternally if they worshipped him. He was depicted as an imposing, gleaming fissure with a fork-like head. The Pale King was rarely seen outside his palace. I mean, who could blame him for respecting the quarantine guidelines? Maybe he just wants to be extra safe. He was so radiant that even the Moth tribe turned their backs on their creator. Do you remember when I said that all higher beings have special abilities? Well, the Pale King can see into the future, to some extent. I could make some sort of JoJo reference here, but I have decided not to. But his ability to see forward in time caused the mushrooms of the fungal wastes to also accept his rule. When the infection rolled around, the king decided to have a ton of children, and the vessels were created. The vessels were born with void inside of them in order to contain the infection. The Hollow Knight was the chosen vessel, and, well, you all know how that went. In a last-ditch effort, the king locked himself in the mind of a king's mold. There he died for unknown reasons, and then you came along and gathered half of the king's soul charm from his corpse. Oh yeah, and I should also explain another thing. So, when I said king's mold, the Pale King had been experimenting with void, and he made void constructs like the wings molds and the king's molds. This could have been before the vessels, and that's how he knew about the void, and that's the reason why he used the void for the vessels, because he knew what it could do. The Pale King was so radiant that it brought the God-Seekers here in Hallownest. And during the Pantheon of Hallownest, the God-Seeker talks about how the king was super strong, but his essence was just completely erased. This could give us some clue on how he died, but it doesn't seem that anything could have happened to him. It's not like the Shade Lord could do what he did with the Radiance in the last ending and just destroy him completely, because he obviously locked himself in his castle. So that does bring up the question of, once again, how did he die? I actually covered this a little bit in my very first video, and that was a video about the Pale King. So if you want to go check that out, you can, but my microphone isn't the best quality in those, unlike how it is today. But for every king, there is a queen. The Pale King's queen is the White Lady, a root creature who resides in the Queen's Garden, an area that used to belong to the Mosskin, but the White Lady claimed it to create her gardens there. She feels shame for her part in creating the vessels, and she bound herself in the gardens in order to stop herself from having more children. She also had one of the 5 Great Knights in order to guard her against the Mantis traders, and much like the Dung Defender, she is not aware that this Great Knight is dead. Over time, the White Lady's vision started to worsen, and at one point she became blind. It seems that the White Lady's ability is to sense things within her roots, but I'm not 100% sure about that. One interesting thing to note here is that the White Lady hides from the Godseeker's attunement. They wonder if the White Lady is actually diminishing her power by choice. One thing to add is that maybe the root form isn't her normal form. I was watching the newest Mossbag video, and in one part he talks about how in Ari's sketchbook there is a drawing of the White Lady with a more cleaned up cloak similar to the Pale King, and less roots, but the whole roots thing is because she rooted herself in the gardens in order to stop having children. But with good guys, there's always bad guys. The Radiance is on that end of the spectrum. The Radiance is a light similar to Essence, and the Void is her ancient enemy. She is the creator of the Moth tribe, and in turn the Moths worship her. Like I said before, the Pale King expanded the minds of his new subjects, and the Moth tribe turned their backs on the Radiance and worshipped the Pale King instead. The Radiance was then forgotten, but to explain this, you might need a little bit of context. The way the Radiance gets worshipped is almost like them knowing that she exists. This keeps her alive because of the fact that the Radiance is most likely only in the dream realm, so they have to remember her in order to keep her alive. The only thing that kept her alive was the statue on Hallownest's crown. Someone must have seen the statue, and that made it so her memory was spread through Hallownest. At one point, all the bugs in Hallownest were dreaming of the blazing light, the Radiance. But some of the king's subjects resisted her memory, and that manifested as the infection. And so the king did his thing with all the vessels, and the Radiance was sealed in the Hollow Knight, but of course in-game the infection starts to seep out again. During the Pantheon of Hallownest, the Godseekers want to attune the Radiance to Godhome. She was attuned in her most powerful and perfect form, the Absolute Radiance! But when there are dreams, there are nightmares. That nightmare is the Nightmare Heart. The heart is responsible for the creation of the Grim Troop, a ritual that takes place in dying kingdoms where the leader gets sacrificed and its flames are given to the child, essentially making the leader immortal. It seems that the White Lady actually knows of the ritual, talking about the Scarlet Heart if you have the Grim Child equipped while talking to the White Lady. Not much is known about this higher being. Its ability is most likely the ability to perform the ritual. But if you want to learn more about this creature, I recommend you watch both of Mossbag's videos on the Grim Troop. The main thing he talks about is a theory that the Grimkin are just ghosts of some sort that are given sentience through the masks that they wear. One thing is for certain, the heart has the ability to take control of people's minds, because you can see this in Braum, because if you banish the ritual, he turns into Nim, so Braum is most likely an identity made by the Nightmare Heart. Nightmares and dreams aside, let's talk about a big slug. Un made all the life in Green Path. The Mosskin were made from the dream of Un. Un is trying to call to the Mosskin, and are waiting for the call to return. You can see this with the Moss Knight at the lake of Un saying that she is calling home, so close. The Godseeker mentions that she can barely feel Un's presence anymore, meaning that Un's strength is quickly diminishing. That's really about it. There's not much to talk about when it comes to Un. The Radiance has an enemy, but the enemy of an enemy is not necessarily your friend. The Shade Lord is a creature that we know very, very little about. So it's just going to be a bunch of crazy speculation for this. One of the only bits of information that we have is that it's most likely connected to the Void Heart charm, due to you not being able to enter the Pantheon of Hollownest without it. But this creature being called the Shade Lord in the files makes me think that he could be a creature made up of Vessel Shades. That's why we see the Void covering the screen in the Pantheon 4 cutscene, while the Shade Lord roars could be heard. But this could be debunked by the fact that we, the Knight, are also in that cutscene, and we are the ones doing the last Pantheon, or maybe the Shade Lord just didn't consume us, but I find that to be quite unlikely. But the fact that the Shade Lord is alive before it consumes the vessels means that the Shade Lord is most likely just a creature from the Abyss. The Shade Lord could also be a creation made by the ancient civilization, but that doesn't make sense because the ancient civilization didn't make the Void, they just worshipped it. So maybe the Shade Lord was the god they were actually worshipping. But the wiki states that the Knight does take form of the Shade Lord during the Embrace the Void ending, so that backs up my theory that all the vessels are actually the Shade Lord. So now we get into the powerful beings, starting with the Lifeblood creature. Literally nothing is known about this creature except that it has some sort of connection to Lifeblood, and that it's considered a god. But being considered a god really isn't saying much when the massive Moss Charger is considered a god. Mossbag talked about this creature in some of his videos. He talks about some theories, but I'm here to bring you my take, not recite the texts of God himself. Theory 1. The ancient civilization locked it in the Lifeblood room because they feared its power. There's literally no evidence to back this up, it's just crazy speculation. The second theory is that the Pale King locked it up because he outlawed Lifeblood. Or it was maybe just one of the theories for the Grubs, where he locked the creature up in order to rule untested for his power. But one thing is for certain, this creature is powerful, and it has some connection to Lifeblood. And I kind of hope us getting rid of the door makes it so that this creature can make its way into Silksong, but I can guarantee that that's probably not gonna happen. The next, I guess, multiple powerful beings are the gods of thunder and rain. Little is known about these guys, similar to the Lifeblood creature. But we know they were the original gods for the Godseekers, but they just up and died at some point. Them dying was the thing that led the Seekers to Hollownest in search of new gods to attune with. The two gods in the background of the room with the weathered mask are known as the Old Gods in the files, meaning that these two are most likely the God of Thunder and the God of Rain. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video about Hollow Knight's various higher beings. Really? No special outro this time? He's gone. Well, I guess go enjoy the rest of the day. Join the Discord and subscribe, please.